From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Caitlin Lyons.
Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are in a dead heat. Our new Bloomberg News swing state poll showing them exactly tied with 12 days until Election Day.
The candidates taking their closing messages on the road, Harris in Georgia and Trump in Arizona at this hour. We'll have more with our political panel and look down the ballot with Erin Covey of the Cook Political Report.
Plus, with our poll showing the economy still the top issue in the battleground states, we'll take a closer look at the tax policy proposals of both campaigns with former Texas Congressman Kevin Brady, now with the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Thanks for joining us on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power, live from Washington. Kaylee Lyons, we are still talking about the economy, stupid.
Yep.
After this poll out today from Bloomberg, reminding us there are other issues, but none comes close to this one.
That is still number one, and by and large, swing state voters do still trust Donald Trump more on that issue, 50% to 45% for Harris. But almost as if she read this data, Kamala Harris is running a new ad about the economy in the battleground states.
I will take on price gouging to bring down grocery prices. I will lower the cost of health care insurance. Donald Trump, well, he wants to give more tax breaks to the wealthy. I will cut taxes for the middle class instead. You may not always agree with me, but I promise I will do everything I can to lift up the middle class and be a president for all Americans.
Joining us now at the table, Bloomberg's Saleha, Mohsin, and Wendy Benjaminson with their eyes on the campaign trail. Welcome to both of you. It's great to have you with us this evening. Wendy, for starters, congratulations on a year of polls.
Yes.
We have October to October and a very interesting breadth of data here. But let's start with the poll at hand, the closing poll of this campaign. This is the last time we're going to have numbers out of the swing states. It's a literal tie, 49-49, but almost as if Kaylee mentioned, as if she was watching Kamala Harris going back to the economy, it seems, for the final message here.
Well, it's a smart move on her part because the economy over the course of that year has never faltered from being the top issue by a factor of at least two. It is, in this month, it was the top issue of 36% of swing state voters. The next one down was immigration at 15%, and then it goes down beyond that. And the other two are reproductive rights at 12% and then democracy at 10%. And yet, for the last week or so, she has been focused on Donald Trump's anti-democratic, and I use small d there, sort of statements about, using the military and things like that, and his rambling sort of rallies and things like that. But what our poll also showed was that voters accept Donald Trump's personality. They accept his outlook on things, and yet they still trust him more to run the economy. So this ad of Harris's sort of brings that back, because when she talks about housing, when she talks about health care, her numbers in our monthly tracking poll tick up. So it's a good thing in these last few weeks to start reminding people that if she wants to win, that she does have an economic plan.
Yeah, well, as you point to more of the personality questions, Wendy, voters in the battleground states are more likely to see Harris as mentally fit, honest, and compassionate. Trump is dangerous and too old, and yet this thing, Saleha, is still a tie. And Wendy was talking about kind of the consistency with which the economy has been the number one issue. The other thing that's incredibly consistent across our year of polls is the support for Donald Trump. It's never less than 47%, never more than 49%. There is a clear ceiling here. Can we say the same about Harris?
We don't know enough, right? She just joined in July. And so we're wondering now, has she hit her high water mark? Did she peak too soon for a Democratic Party win? I will say on the issue of the economy versus personality, if you are sitting in one of these swing states, you're not like us constantly thinking and talking about this. You're thinking about cost of living. You don't care about personality if you like that this person might be able to bring down your cost of living.
That's been a real lesson, of course. Yet we find as well a plurality of swing state voters, likely voters, believe Kamala Harris is going to win the election, even though we have a tied poll. There's something about voters trying to pick a winner, as we've seen in past elections. Does this play in Harris's favor?
Well, everyone's trying to pick a winner, right? We have prediction markets, betting markets, and markets themselves thinking they know exactly who's going to win. Polls have a coin toss.
People like to align themselves with the winner, though, right? If they see momentum, it can become attractive in itself.
Yeah, if you think you're about to go cast a vote and it's the winner anyway, you're like a bandwagon fan. And hey, you helped the winner get in. Whereas if you see that the momentum is for someone else, if you're an undecided voter, don't have strong opinions, but have decided to vote, you could go for the other person.
So as we consider the kind of slate of issues here and where we're going to see these candidates over the course of the next week, tomorrow, they'll both be in Texas. Donald Trump talking about immigration, Harris talking about abortion. Next week, she'll be here in D.C. talking about democracy and calling back to January 6th. Whose argument is going to be able to resonate most based on the data we're seeing, Wendy?
That's really hard to tell. I mean, part of the reason she's in Texas is to boost Colin Allred, the Democratic Senate candidate, who is now in a dead heat with Senator Ted Cruz, the longtime Republican senator from that state. So that would help her, of course, if she became president and had a Democratic Senate. It's certainly in her interest to boost candidates like that. But also, Texas has some of the strongest restrictions on abortion of any state in the nation. And I think she knows, especially in a Democratic city like Houston, a diverse city like Houston, she is going to have a receptive audience, even if you're a Republican, to the notion of looser abortion rights than women in Texas have now. You know, Trump is also going to Madison Square Garden, not exactly a Republican stronghold. And, you know, he's trying to make the case. Also, he knows that wherever he goes, he's going to get attention. So does she right now. So while it is important to do that retail politicking in the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, we saw what happened to Hillary Clinton when she skipped some of those states in the last month. But they will both get attention wherever they are.
Last evening, Kamala Harris had an audience on CNN, a town hall that we might remind ourselves is supposed to be a debate. Donald Trump never agreed to it, didn't like the venue, and so Kamala Harris got an hour of free airtime and had this to say when asked directly if she thinks Donald Trump, remembering the comments we heard yesterday from General John Kelly, if she thinks the former president is a fascist.
General Milley calling Donald Trump a fascist. You yourself have not used that word to describe him. Let me ask you tonight, do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I also believe that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted.
This is the headline that really came out of the town hall last evening, Saleha. Not a remark about the economy or controlling prices. It's back to this threat to democracy, much like Joe Biden was messaging when he was at the top of the ticket. This isn't effective based on our polling, is it?
No, I mean, it may have been in 2022 during the midterms when the red wave was blocked and not a lot of people saw that coming. And I know a lot of Democrats put that onto Biden's trip at the time to Philadelphia by the Liberty Bell or by Independence Hall to talk about democracy. Maybe that's the same ploy that she's making. It was also just the timing of it. John Kelly had come out with a statement. That's the most sensational thing that that she had said. Also, she has not talked a lot about the economy. Our editor-in-chief has interviewed Donald Trump on a big stage to talk about economic policy. She did not accept an invitation yet.
Just quickly before we go here, we've obviously talked extensively about Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. In many of these states that could decide the election, there are other choices on the ballot, like Jill Stein, Wendy. How should we be considering that effect?
Our poll showed that her getting less than 1% support. And that means in our poll of 4,900 people, that meant less than 100 people. I don't think she can tip the election. I understand that Arab American groups are sort of pushing Arab American voters or Muslim voters in Michigan to vote for Jill Stein to sort of spoil that because they're not happy with either Trump or Harris's positions on the war in Israel. But I don't think she's going to generate enough support. Remember, almost no one is undecided at this point. And 18, 20 million people have already voted.
Yeah, that's true. We're seeing record turnout in a lot of these states. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson and Saleha Mohsin, thank you so much. Coming up, we'll move from the presidential race to some of the most competitive House races with Erin Covey, editor at the Cook Political Report, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
in the House, it's actually easier for Republicans to win seats this cycle, but Republicans now are behind on money. I just came back and saw 4 races that were tied that Democrats had, but they don't have the money to go play. They've made a mistake in this process. We always had more. I don't see the strategy in the House where you're on offense.
Kevin McCarthy, former House Speaker, on Bloomberg earlier this morning. Joining us now for a closer look at how competitive the race for the House majority is in this final stretch of the campaign is Erin Covey, editor at the Cook Political Report. Erin, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We have spent most of the day today talking about our new swing state polling in the presidential race that shows the race for the presidency is a coin flip. Is it a coin flip for the House at this point, or is the outcome more obvious?
No, it truly is a coin flip for the House as well. While in the Senate, we do believe that Republicans are favored to take control next year, the House is a lot murkier. And that's because currently Republicans have an incredibly narrow 4-seat majority right now. And the way we see it with our individual race ratings, neither party is favored in the 218 seats they would need for a majority. So it's going to come down to the couple dozen seats that we have rated as toss-ups right now, which are spread across the country and largely do not overlap with the presidential battleground map.
I'm so glad you said that, Erin, because I want you to take us by the hand and walk us through election night, and I'm guessing the day after the election as well. People will be obsessing over the 7 swing states the night of November 5th. You're going to be looking at a different map here with, I'm assuming, a very close eye on states like New York and California. What will the early evening do to draw your attention, and how long will it be before we know which party controls the House?
Honestly, if it takes a couple of days to call the House, I would be pleased with that. I think at this rate, it might take several days, if not more than 1 week. And that's because a lot of the House battleground is, like you said, in California and in these Western states that are both behind time zone wise, but also take longer to count their ballots. So there were races in California last cycle that took days, weeks to call. And if the majority is coming down to a single seat or 2 or 3, it might take a really long time for us to actually know who's in control of the House in 2025. But the places I'll be paying closest attention to are, first of all, California, which is home to 5 toss-up seats currently. So that's about a fifth of our toss-up column is in California alone. We also have a couple of seats in New York that we're closely watching, that Republicans hold, and also seats across Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona that we're paying close attention to as well. But if you also look at our toss-up column, you'll see that it's pretty evenly split between the two parties. Democrats control a couple fewer seats than Republicans do that are in the toss-up column, but it is fairly evenly divided.
Well, so as we consider New York as a case study, Erin, Donald Trump is going to be there this weekend. On Sunday, he's holding a massive rally at Madison Square Garden. And a lot of people have asked, well, why? And maybe the why is open to interpretation. But is it possible part of the why is to boost those House Republicans who are trying to hold on to those competitive seats? Does it have that effect?
You know, I don't know. I think the why, like you said, is open to interpretation, and we can speculate about that. I think it is true, however, that Trump's performance in New York, while he's not going to carry the state, certainly, if he does a little bit better than he did in 2020, that could really help Republicans' prospects in the competitive House races there. Currently, Republicans are defending around 4 highly competitive House races, and they're spread across the state. There's one on Long Island, one in the Hudson Valley, 2 further upstate. So they don't exactly overlap with Manhattan, but the increased attention on New York, and if Trump is able to boost his numbers a little bit there, that could then help these Republicans win re-election, because all 4 of them are running in districts that Biden won in 2020. Now, it's not clear that Harris will necessarily actually win all of these districts. Some of them, one of them, Biden only won by a couple of points, so I wouldn't be surprised if Trump carries it in 2024. However, there are seats like Anthony D'Esposito's seat on Long Island that Biden won by 14 points, that even if Harris does significantly worse than he did, she's probably still going to carry it by a couple of points, and that's going to make it difficult for these Republican incumbents to overperform Trump.
To what extent is Donald Trump's rhetoric and some of the criticism that he's been hearing, whether he's talking about Arnold Palmer or I don't even know where to go from there, describing the first lady or the vice president in this case and the second gentleman in words that I can't use on the air. Is there a concern among frontline Republicans in Biden-friendly districts that this could mean a loss for them?
You know, I think there's always going to be concern because for most of these frontline Republicans, they are going to have to run ahead of Trump if they want to win re-election. And that's a task that they have known they would have to complete all cycle. And so they've been navigating all of Trump's myriad of controversies and various legal cases and all of that as well. I do think that from what we're seeing in the polls, Trump is basically matching his 2020 share of the vote, at least in battleground states. And so it's not like he is doing any worse than he did. In fact, you know, there's, of course, concern that if polls undercount Trump's support again, he might do even better than he did in 2020. And so I don't think Republicans are particularly concerned right now about Trump being a drag on the top of the ticket, but I think he has been a drag on many of these Republicans all cycle just by nature of their districts and the fact that he's going to lose them.
Erin, I also want to talk about a couple of Senate races because I was struck by a trio of polls that have come out of Emerson College in the last day or two. In Wisconsin, the incumbent Democrat, Tammy Baldwin, 48, also the number her Republican challenger, Mr. Hovde, is getting. In Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, the incumbent Democrat, at 47. Dave McCormick, his Republican challenger, at 46. In Texas, Republican Ted Cruz, 48. Colin Allred, his Democratic challenger, 47%. It feels like all of these two are a coin flip. Erin, if you're looking at the picture widely for incumbents in this cycle, how does that kind of dictate the way you think ultimately these races could go?
Yeah, so in the Senate races, Democrats have had the difficulty of running in states that are either really competitive at the presidential level, places like Michigan and Pennsylvania, or places where Trump is going to win, places like Ohio and Montana. So they've been in a much more difficult position than Republicans this cycle. There's also just more Democrats up for re-election in the Senate. But I will say that I'm not too surprised by the fact that we've seen some of these Senate races tighten, because we're expecting them to mostly fall in line with where we see the presidential race play out in these races. Senators, unlike House members, do have stronger individual brands and have the ability to outrun the top of the ticket in some places for some senators, but it is still a difficult thing to do. In 2020, Susan Collins was the only senator up for re-election who won in a state that the opposing party, Democrats, carried. And so this is a really tough task for senators to pull off, and it's not surprising that we're seeing the races tighten in these battleground states. In Texas, I think that poll is probably a little bit rosy for Colin Allred, the Democrat there, and I think that's because we still expect Trump to win Texas by several points, probably similar to his 2020 margin of about 5.5 points. And so I think that Allred is probably in a good position to overperform Harris in Texas. The question is, how much can he overperform? If he's only overperforming by a couple of points, that may not be enough to close the gap there.
Why do you expect the tightening that we're seeing here, Erin, where we're talking about a tied presidential race, a one-point race, in a lot of these very closely contested Senate races that Kayleigh was referring to? Is it just more people paying attention late in the game?
I think it's more people paying attention. It's also the fact that for a lot of these Democratic senators, they had a really significant financial advantage over their Republican opponents from the beginning of the cycle. So they were able to go up on TV and start airing ads much earlier than a lot of their Republican opponents. Now we're at the point where all of the super PACs have gotten involved and these Republicans have gotten a boost on the airwaves. And so that has helped them as well. And they're also becoming better known. As a challenger candidate, you're not starting with much name ID, if any at all. And so it takes a little bit to bring your numbers to where you would expect a generic candidate to be at in your state.
Erin, great to have you back. Erin Covey, editor at The Cook Political Report. Thank you, as always, for the insights. Coming up on Balance of Power, Boeing factory workers reject a new labor contract late last night. We'll have more on what that means for the airplane manufacturer's future, not to mention the workers involved here. We'll take a closer look next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
For our members, we couldn't reach, especially when it's been 16 years since we've had a chance to bargain every area of our contract. And trying to make all that up in one is very hard to do, but our members deserve more. They've spoken loudly, and we're going to go back to the table to try to achieve those things.
That was Boeing Union President John Holden last night after rejecting a new labor contract with the plane maker that would have raised wages by 35% over 4 years. Legacy pensions remain the sticking point now. Joining us for more is Bloomberg Intelligence senior aerospace analyst George Ferguson. So, George, if pensions are the sticking point, knowing Boeing isn't on the most solid footing financially, what would it do to Boeing from a financial perspective to agree to this?
Yeah, I think they can't. I think it's sort of a full stop. They can't. They have to find another incentive somewhere, probably inside the 401k, probably more pay. But, we've seen U.S. companies that have had pensions in the past. I think General Motors was the classic example where, as they change size, especially as they get smaller, those pensions become such a burden on the company, they can't manage and they ultimately go bankrupt. And so I just think they can't give it on this one.
Was this a reality check for the union when it comes to the pension, George? This is like an 80s retro movie here. The pension's not coming back, right? How long does this mean that they'll be out? How long are these factories on mothballs?
Well, I mean, look, we've been out a month. I think having, lost the vote last night from sort of the Boeing perspective, I don't think Boeing can rush back with another offer immediately because I think it looks like desperation. Boeing's filed this shelf offering for $25 billion in equity issuance. I think they go to the market here, raise that cash so that they can support themselves during the strike, and then give it a week or two and go back in maybe as strong a position as they can to negotiate with the union and give the union members a little time to miss another couple of weeks of paychecks, look at their personal income statements and think about how much longer they want to do this. I think that's the road to the finish here.
George, we just have about a minute left here, but if this goes on for weeks longer, is it even going to be possible for Boeing to work through the backlog of the planes that they are not currently manufacturing?
Yeah, look, I think the whole backlog is going to get pushed out. It'll take longer to restart the factories than they're on strike. So the backlog will get built. Will it get built on the timing they thought? Absolutely not. Airlines are already planning on delays. Again, I think it's multiple months and there's other problems in supply chain. I think every airline's kind of looking closely at what they're expecting from Boeing and from Airbus and pushing those out.
He's been up since before dawn with a pile of earnings today, not just Boeing, but the airline sector at large. And George, we thank you for your expertise. George Ferguson at Bloomberg Intelligence. Coming up, we'll take a look at proposed tax plans of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris with former Congressman Kevin Brady, now with the Alliance of Competitive Taxation. Coming up next on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
This does pull us into being an election cop. Whether or not there's manipulation and fraud, remains to be seen. But we will monitor markets. We will take tips or any information we get from the general public, and we'll pursue any action as we do in any part of our markets.
Ross Benham, chair of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, earlier this week, right here on Balance of Power. As you might have read on the terminal, a trader who spent more than $45 million on Polymarket bets that Donald Trump will win the election has been identified as a French national following an investigation by the cryptocurrency-based prediction markets platform. Those bets having sparked a lot of questions about market manipulation. Joining us now, this evening's political panel, Lisa Camuso-Miller, Republican strategist, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, along with Kevin Walling, Democratic strategist, vice president of HG Creative. Great to see you both. Welcome back to the table. I don't know why people get so keyed up about this. Has been a very hot topic and controversial for some reason as Democrats challenge the veracity of the betting market because it doesn't agree with what we're seeing in polling. Is this just a new fact of life in politics?
I think it is. Lisa and I were talking about this beforehand, that this has now devolved into something else for people to get involved in.
Sure.
Listen, I think, to your point, Joe, the former president is out on the campaign trail touting these numbers, that his numbers are up when it comes to the betting market. I just stick to horses when it comes to actual betting every year with the Kentucky Derby, and leave it to to the politics, to supposed professionals like us.
I guess it raises the question of whether there is a factor of expectation becoming reality. We're talking today about our new Bloomberg News Morning Consult swing state poll that finds in these battleground states, no matter who they're supporting, voters do think it is more likely that Kamala Harris wins. The markets think it's more likely that Donald Trump wins. Do either of those things actually matter in the outcome of who wins?
Well, Kayla, it's so hard to know, really. But the one thing that's curious to me is that why are the two so separate? Why are they so different? And why are the numbers so close? So to me, it really sort of comes back to the question about polling, about data, about what information is it really that gives us the proper indication of what's going to happen on Election Day? Because as much as we sort of twist in the wind and hope for information about what's going to happen, the truth of it is that it's still a toss-up, and no one, regardless of what side you're on, really knows what's going to happen on Election Day.
Sure. Foreign betting, of course, in these markets is nothing new, and we always kind of keep an eye on it. It's sort of a fun thing to follow. Now that we have actual Americans placing bets, although in this case a French whale, as is being called, is the one who might have tipped the scale. Does this not speak to the lack of trust in polls? Why would we be obsessing over this otherwise?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a new shiny object for a lot of us to focus on, especially this cycle, to your point, Joe, with the lack of trust in our polling and the fact that so many times, 2016, other races, the polling has been so far off the mark. I give a lot of credence to the Bloomberg Morning Consult polling because it's over time, right? It's going out to some of the same people, tracking trend lines. I think trend lines are much more important than a horse race number at the end of the day. And I think that's where that conversation should be headed. But again, this is a new shiny thing for people to talk about, make some money off things, just like we're seeing it with crypto, other markets like that. It's a new shiny thing.
Is this another thing that we're seeing become political that shouldn't necessarily be so political, Lisa? I mean, what does this say about where we are in our ability to separate anything from the political climate?
It's so interesting, Kaylee. I'm glad you asked that because I had a conversation with a friend of mine last night who's been in this business for just about as long as me. And the point that she made was that politics has become a hobby for people. She's getting calls from, typically it's folks like Kevin and myself and you guys, and we'll talk about what we think is going to happen on Election Day. And now we're getting calls from our friends who are living outside of the industry, who are in the medical industry or who are somewhere else wondering and toiling over what's going to happen in the election. And so much so that everyone is really invested in what's going to happen. It's become a hobby. And so this is just another thing for people to participate and be part of as it relates to what's going to happen on Election Day.
People love to bet as well in this country, as we know.
The gamification
That's
of
right.
everything, I think, is what this is. Kevin Welling and Lisa Camusa-Miller, thank you. You'll be back with us a little bit later on this hour. And coming up, we'll take a look at the proposed tax plans of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris with former Congressman Kevin Brady of the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Will pass a middle-class tax cut that will benefit more than 100 million Americans.
What I'm going to do is something that nobody's ever even thought about doing. No tax on tips.
We will tax capital gains at a rate that rewards investment in America's innovators, founders, and small businesses.
I want to cut taxes on Americans while putting tariffs on China and foreign countries.
My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start-up small businesses.
We will end all taxes on overtime.
Leaving us to wonder which taxes are left. Some of the proposed tax policy plans from both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump that we've heard over the past weeks as we head for Election Day. Joining us now for a closer look at the impact of these ideas should they be enacted, the former Republican congressman, former chair of the Ways and Means Committee, a tax man, Kevin Brady from Texas, now spokesman for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Congressman, it's great to see you. Welcome back, as always, to Bloomberg TV and radio.
Good to see you,
we
Joe.
started
Thank
talking
you.
about your mission, a pleasure as always, your mission to make the Trump-era tax cuts permanent? We started talking about long before that list of exemptions was added. I don't know did we have SALT in there? I have to remember all of them at some point. To what extent are these added ideas, these added deductions and exemptions, making it more difficult to pay for the original 2017-era tax cuts?
Yeah, so there's no question. The promises from both candidates, there are a lot of them. They are very, very expensive, and that would come on top of roughly a $4.5 trillion cost to extend or make permanent the pro-growth, pro-competitive TCJA provisions that are expiring at the end of next year. I think from so I think both whoever is in the White House is going to have make some very tough decisions working with Congress on how they incorporate them, if they can afford them at all, given the dynamics. I think that's one issue. Second is, economically, I think the special provisions, whether it's the $25,000 home credit, the ACA tax credits, this small business startup from Vice President Harris, tips, overtime, Social Security from President Trump. Economically, they may be important to certain constituencies, but they don't move the table economically. The big question is, how do you treat the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions? And how do tariffs play in the economy? I think that's really going to drive how our economy performs in 2026 and beyond.
Well, as we consider what drives the economy, among the other promises Donald Trump specifically is making on the campaign trail include these ideas of mass deportation of millions of people who are not legally in this country but might be paying taxes. Sir, how much does making the math work for the permanence of the 2017-era tax cuts? How much is it dependent on those people staying in this country and still paying into the system?
Yeah, well, I would think my thinking is the first thing you do is lock in those tax cuts, especially those that drove growth in paychecks, growth in jobs, America competitive. That's the corporate rate. That's the R&D rate. That's investment incentives that Vice President Harris is targeting, really key to growth. That's where I would start. Secondly, you need workers in the U.S. In fact, I think that one of the biggest restrictions on our growth as a country over the next decade will be the workers we have or don't have. And so it does play into that. I think legal immigration, finding a way to really fix that front door is going to be key. What I don't know, I don't think anyone really knows yet, is where does President Trump start on these deportations? Are they the criminal element? Are they those who came through the back door? Is he going to assess the 8 to 11 million who came in over the last 3.5 years for refugee status? It is really hard to predict because we don't know where he will head there. It's really hard to predict what the economic impact of that will be.
Congressman, we still haven't heard about taxing unrealized capital gains, which is something that Joe Biden had suggested and Kamala Harris has been asked about, but we haven't had a definitive answer on this. What would the impact be on the economy and on the markets?
Yeah, I think it would be severe. One, I think this is a very misguided tax. Two, it is likely unconstitutional. It's definitely unworkable. That's why other countries have abandoned it. And at the end of the day, I think it's very economically damaging because, look, the investments people make after they earn their wages, especially those that create capital gains, that create growth, even when they're not realized yet, are really important to the economy. Taxing them when they've not been realized will drive investment away in our U.S. economy, certainly will make it more attractive to invest elsewhere in the world, which is easily done. So, yeah, I think I can't think of a worse idea other than raising the corporate tax rate.
Congressman, as we consider what some of the pay-for ideas put forward have been, they include not just the idea that lower taxes will spur growth, which is, I think, in line with your way of framing this issue. But for Donald Trump, it's also this notion that higher tariffs will bring more money into the Treasury's coffers. Is that an appropriate way of thinking about offsetting tax policy, or could that potentially be just as destructive as it is helpful?
I think, look, my views are pretty well known here. I think tariffs are incredibly destructive, both driving up prices, making it harder for small businesses and Main Street businesses to bring these inputs in, compete around the world. It invites retaliation from other countries. That hurts the Made in America, farmers, manufacturing, other workers as well. Yes, it does generate revenue, but it generates revenue from families and businesses in America and rarely punishes the other countries. And so, yeah, that revenue has a very high economic pain that comes with it that subtracts from what I think with his tax cuts and deregulation in his first term. You know, people want that Trump economy back. Those massive tariffs, I think, subtract and weaken the strength of his economy.
Congressman, I'm glad that you're not in the re-election game right now because we can talk openly here on Bloomberg. I just wonder your read on this race. You've been at this for a minute, and we have our new Bloomberg News swing state poll out today that shows it literally tied, not even within the margin. It's 49 to 49, no matter what tax proposal we hear or any other proposal from these two candidates. These numbers just don't want to budge. How are you reading this race less than 2 weeks out?
Well, I am reading it just like you do, which is it is incredibly tight. I have never seen it quite to this degree. Well, the number of undecideds is shrinking dramatically in some of these battleground states. The candidates are now much better known than they were even, a month and a half or two ago. That's changing things. So, I hate the old, saying that it's all about turnout, but I think in this case, it is all about turnout. Yeah.
Well, and if it's about turnout in the handful of states that will decide the Electoral College, sir, why do you think both of them are going to be in your home state of Texas tomorrow?
Well, I think for President Trump, it is another way to help Senator Ted Cruz in his reelection campaign, and certainly the president's going to be visiting counties that overperform. For Senator Cruz. I think for Vice President Harris, it's just a statement to try to flesh out more of her policies that people still are wondering about what they mean. Coming to Houston, which is a heavily Democratic county, won't, again, budge the needle much at voting, but gives her a chance to do messaging in what is not a purple state, is a solid Republican state.
All right. Former Republican Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas, spokesman for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Thank you so much for joining us and also reminding us we're a week away from Halloween. Forget the election. That was a well-decorated house for Kevin Brady if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube. Still ahead on YouTube, TV, and radio, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris taking their closing arguments on the road. As we just mentioned, they'll both be in Texas tomorrow. Our political panel will be back with us for more on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
So I may not be quick to have the answer as soon as you ask it about a specific policy issue sometimes, because I'm going to want to research it. I'm going to want to study it. I'm kind of a nerd sometimes, I confess. And some might call that a weakness, especially if you're, in an interview or just kind of, being asked a certain question and you expected to have the right answer right away. But that's how I work.
Vice President Kamala Harris last night during a CNN town hall when she was asked what her weaknesses are. Back with us for our political panel this evening is Lisa Camusa-Miller and Kevin Walling here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio as we assess that town hall and the other closing arguments we have heard in different forums. The real news that was made from that town hall last night, Kevin, was that she agreed when asked that she would describe Donald Trump as a fascist. She is now increasingly focusing on what she described as his unfitness for office being threatening to democracy. She's sounding an awful lot like Joe Biden was sounding when he was still in this race. Is that a strategic error?
It's a really good point, Kayleigh, and we saw that Joe Biden actually kind of bucked the trend by focusing on that, and that Philly speech that we talked about 2 years ago, right before the midterms, and come to find out that was an animating issue for a lot of Americans in the midterms. Now we know on Tuesday the vice president is going to make her final pitch to voters on a national stage like this at the Ellipse, the same spot, obviously, that Donald Trump spoke from on January 6th. I think tying those themes together. And again, the way that she answered it yesterday was quoting directly from John Kelly, former general, obviously chief of staff to President Trump. And I think that will likely be an effective message to a lot of these Republicans that are still waiting for that permission structure to come on board the Harris campaign.
Is this a Harris campaign? And we have our poll that we've been talking about. It's a dead heat, 49-49 in the swing states, that says it doesn't matter what we throw out there. This race is still tied. So bring them back to January 6th. Is that the strategy in the closing?
You know, I mean, I think just about everything is on the table. Mm-hmm. Not a lot really sticks, regardless of what we learn about Donald Trump every single day that is negative and not helpful to the advancement of the American people and their issues. We have to talk about issues, right? So we can talk about and remind people of all the things that he has done and why he's done everything against the idea of democracy and the idea of America. Mm-hmm. But we also have to remind him, too, of what a Harris administration will bring to the American people. They are looking for those answers, regardless of the fact that it is unfair that she's been asked for more and more and more of that. And Donald Trump can talk about lots of other things that are not relevant to how he's going to help the American people. She will have to do both of those things. She will have to remind about the conflict with democracy and the way the American structure has been set that people still rely on every single day and love and want to see stay in place. But she will also have to articulate how it is she is going to make change and make good change for the American people that are desperate for that kind of activity in their own home lives, their budgets, and everywhere else.
Well, on the point of their budgets, what our poll shows is that across the battleground states, it is still the economy, full stop, number one issue, and they trust more Donald Trump on that issue broadly. She's going to be in Texas tomorrow speaking about abortion. Next Tuesday, as Kevin was alluding to, she'll be speaking about threats to democracy. Can either of these issues offset the weakness of the economy at this point, or does she have to spend more time on that messaging specifically?
I really do think she has to talk about the economy more. There has to be some other. There was an ad that was dropped today that is specifically about her economic policy and plan and the way that would look going forward. I think that's smart and that's strategic. She has to talk about a lot of those things. But I think also, too, she also, don't forget, this is just one woman that's all across the country. She also has a fleet of really smart surrogates. I mean, you're going to see the former president, Barack Obama, Beyonce, my guy, Bruce Springsteen will be out there.
Too, New Jersey. Here on the panel.
But also, I think, but that's the other thing, too, is as much as we're asking for it from her, we are also asking for it from her surrogates. She cannot be everywhere. And so that alone is another contour of the campaign that we will watch as campaign kids to see how that unfolds. And that will be helpful.
Live shot of a little celebrity power right there as Spike Lee follows Samuel L. Jackson at the rally that's underway right now for Kamala Harris. But let's talk about Donald Trump's closing arguments and optics, because last night in Georgia, it was Tucker Carlson who opened for the former president and raised a lot of eyebrows with comments he made speaking about Kamala Harris. Let's listen.
There has to be a point at which Dad comes home. And when Dad gets home, you know what he says? You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now. And no, it's not going to hurt me more than it hurts you. No, it's not.
All right, Kevin. So if this comes down to a battle between the genders, Donald Trump's weak spot is women, what just happened there?
Yeah, Joe, it's an interesting point, and the vice president was asked about this gender divide that we're seeing, especially in the early vote as well. I'd much rather be in the position of the vice president. Women historically show up in greater numbers, especially in battleground states, than their male counterparts. They're reliable Democratic voters, obviously. This is a play, and we see with Tucker Carlson just yesterday. They're going to have another rally with Tucker next week in Arizona. This is just doubling down on the same universe of people. Former president's taping an interview with Joe Rogan. That's an incredibly popular podcast, but does it actually reach folks that aren't in his camp? I doubt it. So I'd much rather be the vice president when it comes to this gender divide, to your question, Joe. And we're seeing it play out right now in the early vote numbers.
But is that also potentially why a strategy of just doubling down on the male vote makes sense? You know, the women are high propensity voters, and the males who are more on your side are less so. So just do everything you can to turn those guys out.
I guess so. I'm still catching my breath from what Tucker Carlson said. Unfortunately for Tucker Carlson, he is not Teflon. Donald Trump he stands in a very different place than Tucker Carlson said. What he said right there is actually repugnant to a female, regardless of party.
I thought you might feel that way. I think a lot of voters do, and I wonder how this comes out in the end. To Kaylee's point, this is a campaign that's not been able to expand the base. 47% on the bottom, 49% on the top for the last year. So we're doubling down, and that seems to be happening with both campaigns. If this is a turnout election, get your people.
But, Joe, to your point, doubling down in 2016 was a winning strategy for the former president, right? He drove out a lot of voters, especially in Pennsylvania, Rust Belt states that had not been activated before. His grievance campaign drove out. We'll see if it's the same case this cycle.
So he's going with what he knows
Exactly
works.
right.
Kevin Walling, Lisa Camuso-Miller, thank you so much for showing grace with sensitive topics, as always, and great analysis. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter, and we'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.